My name is Maurice Prather. I've been working with SharePoint since 2001, so it's been quite a few years if you want to do the math there. I work for Aptilon. I'm one of the owners, and if you'd like to reach me and ask some questions about the presentation or anything in general, feel free to reach me at my email address. Twitter address is up there as well. So, our agenda is pretty straightforward. Really what I want to do is kind of show you a little bit of a new technology, kind of combine some things that we know about SharePoint, and then really just leave it as an open-ended discussion. So my hope is that we will have an opportunity for you guys to ask questions and just, kind of spark ideas. So, what we're going to be looking at, just to kind of get everyone on the same page, is I don't want anyone to think that this is going to be a how-to session. This is more of a, what could we do? What are the things that we might want to incorporate within our business? As we look at SharePoint, especially if we look at like the agenda that's out there, a lot of what we do in business today probably has been trying to figure out what we can do with SharePoint, and this is another element that I want to introduce to you. And so I just want to make sure that we look at this as just a plain and simple brainstorming session, if not anything else. So one of the things that we're going to take a look at is this concept of the Internet of Things. Now, when I use the phrase the Internet of Things, do you guys know what that is? That doesn't surprise me, because I asked the very same question to a couple different folks, and they're like, I don't know. I've kind of heard about it. It's a phrase, it's a terminology that you might have seen in a variety of publications. What you will see is that the Internet of Things is really this concept by which we have a lot of devices that are all communicating with each other. Now, that sounds like a very, I don't know how to put it, a very glorious ideal, right? And so the question then becomes to us of, well, what is that vision? How does that really work for us? And so if we start thinking about the concept of devices, all sorts of devices that are connected to each other, we really have to think about what are the core elements of this concept. And that would be that we really have three different things that we deal with when we're talking about devices. We have to think about something such as a data repository. If devices are all connected, at some point in time they have to have a common element, and so that would be our data repository. So as we're looking at this concept of the Internet of Things, we've probably seen services such as Patch Bay, which has now evolved into something that is called Cosm. We now have Azure Web Services, and they have their storage mechanism, right? We have the storage blob service. They also have data tables up on Azure. And then obviously we have our custom sources, and that would be our more traditional. So for example, SQL and perhaps MySQL, et cetera. Then we have this concept of interaction. If we're talking about devices, what are we really looking at? Well, obviously the first thing that probably pops into your mind is phones, right? You have your phones that are recording all sorts of data. I'm pretty sure most everyone's got a mapping program on their phone, right? Figure out where you are, where you need to go. But then if you start abstracting that a little bit further, it's like you can look at the history of where you've been and the things that are important to you. Devices would also include computers and then obviously other gadgets. And then finally, the other thing that's kind of missing out of this concept of Internet of Things is analytics. And so as we start thinking about analytics, we have to think about how we're going to look at that data. Is it the data, the raw data? Where is it being processed? Who's going to be working on that data, and how is it going to be manipulated? So I want to show you a website, and I took a couple snapshots in anticipation of, I just realized I'm not set up. I'm glad I took the snapshots. I wanted to show you something, a website that is a classic example of the Internet of Things. There's this site called marinetraffic.com. All right, if you guys have a browser available, you can go and navigate to it. And what you'll see is that there's this site that collects data from devices that are sitting on boats all throughout the world, okay? Now, these devices, in turn, record all sorts of information. Obviously, they have state information, boat name, length, where you registered, but then they also carry current runtime information or state information about where you're going, how fast you're going, what your projected plan was. Now, from a very simple standpoint, these devices, depending on the size of your boat, are effectively optional devices. You could go down to a local marine store, buy what is known as an AIS device, put it on your boat, and it's just going to spit out information. And the whole idea is you have these devices that are spitting out information so that anyone in close proximity can in turn receive that data and go, okay, I can see that this boat is coming toward me or going away. Now, this site, marinetraffic.com, is based on the concept that all of these devices already exist on boats, and they're already spitting out information. So why don't we collect this information and make this information globally available to everyone? So if you were to go to that website right now, you would be able to drill down and you would be able to see something like this and find any vessel in the world. Well, again, if the reception's there, and you can find information about what that boat is doing, what kind of boat is it, where's it going, and really understand what that device is doing. So that's a really good example of what we call the Internet of Things, right? You have these devices producing data, and you're able to go and interact with it. So if we think about it, right, all of this information, all of this interaction really comes down to one thing. It's all about our data. So somebody was really smart and said, look at that. We have a device, millions of devices actually, that are sitting out there just telling us what our marine traffic is doing. So let's take a look at how we can explore how we can take this concept of the Internet of Things and address it within our business, right? What are the business needs that we're trying to work with? We know that, for example, we probably have existing processes. We know that we probably want to put in new systems and new processes. And finally, we probably also want to look at the concept of empowering our users. So how can we do that? So if you think about it, our existing processes, whether you're a factory that's producing components, or perhaps you're an office that is trying to measure items that are produced by that office, right? Because eventually we're almost always factories of some kind. The existing process can sometimes be very difficult to change or at least improve upon, right? And so as an example, if I were to go ask my dog, can you please go out and tell me if there's a raccoon in the yard, right? She's going to respond with, yeah, whatever. I'm more comfortable doing exactly what I'm doing. So as we think about this, what we're going to try and do is we're going to take this puzzle. How can we take an existing process, modify it, perhaps maybe even plan for the future with a new system of monitoring. So we're going to look at the concept of monitoring. We're going to look at the concept of perhaps combining SharePoint, right? Because we've invested a lot into SharePoint. We've taught our users a variety of things. And so as we look at this, we're going to ask the question, why are we talking about SharePoint? Why are we talking about remote monitoring? How does this all come together? And if you think about it, just like we had the three concepts that I mentioned earlier, where we have a data repository, interaction, analytics, we have all of those components inside of SharePoint. So as in terms of a SharePoint serving as nothing more than a data repository, we know that in SharePoint 2013, go look at the capacity planning docs, right? It flat out says that you can put 30 million items per list, okay? Now, before anyone gets panicked about, oh my God, that's way more than our 5,000 item limit. Yes, that's a view limit, but let's just kind of keep in mind that SharePoint's really designed to allow you to go larger, and there's considerations for big lists, etc. But that capacity is there. And then as we start looking at the interaction pieces, we have pages, we have web parts. If you've noticed that in 2013 we've got a fantastic search experience now, right? The engine itself is so much more scalable and has so much more opportunity. In turn, we also have a lot more services. Everything's been kind of changed to better accommodate WCF and RESTful services. And then also we have this concept of workflow. And as we know, workflow in 2013 has been kind of pulled out of SharePoint and made a separate service altogether. So that takes care of our interaction piece. And then our analytics piece, where what we have are the traditional players in that space. We have Excel services, we have Power Pivot, and then we also have Performance Point. So those are some reasons that we're trying to combine this concept of the Internet of Things with SharePoint. So let's take a look at a scenario, and the real reason that I'm really happy to kind of play with something new. So let's take a look at our scenario here where what I want to do is just imagine I have physical data, right? Let's go back to that boat example. The boat example is the concept of recording physical data. What is my speed? What is my heading? What kind of device am I? So my first scenario that I want to work with is I want to take this concept of incorporating physical data, and more importantly, I want to take it from a remote location. Then the big criteria for me is I want to leverage my existing dev skill set, right? SharePoint development requires that you know .NET code, right? Okay, and then finally, obviously, I want to continue to utilize my SharePoint knowledge, and I want to also utilize my SharePoint expertise, okay? So that's my first scenario. So what we started looking at was, okay, what are the things that we can work with? And for our solution, we came down to a few different things. What we ended up looking at was there's this framework. We have the .NET framework, but we also have the .NET micro framework, okay? And the micro framework's designed to allow you to work with microcontrollers. Well, and then that leads us to the next question. What kind of microcontroller can I work with? There's a microcontroller called a NetDuino that we can utilize. And then for the remote part, we started thinking about, okay, well, if I'm separated from my farm, for example, how do I get information into my farm and across devices? So I'm going to be working with an XB radio. And then finally, the other piece that I wanted to work with here was a SharePoint service. I had to build a custom service. Just a real quick blurb, if you want to see what the NetDuino is about, they have a website that you can go to. But the net result is, what I wanted to show you real quick is, the NetDuino is this little device right here. You guys can come up and take a look at it. That's the microcontroller right there. It has .NET code. Well, guess what? I love to write .NET code. So this is a very good introduction for me to kind of figure out how to facilitate that physical to digital realm, right? So, and I'm just going to flip through this slide here. Now the next piece is to make it remote is I'm going to have this guy right here, because fundamentally this is going to be my remote station. Now this doesn't have any .NET code in it. What it does have is it has a radio and it has a sensor. And so the whole idea here that I wanted to work with and show you guys is imagine this is obviously going to be smaller in a real production site, but imagine I wanted to take light values, temperature values. I wanted to work with perhaps this was attached to a hydrometer of some kind, right? Where I'm recording information, and eventually I want to utilize that information. So what I'm going to do, Ksenia, if you would, we're going to go ahead and pass this around just so you can take a look at it. The whole idea is, again, we're just looking for an opportunity for you guys to just kind of see how all of this comes together. So our first scenario that we want to look at is, can we record information, right? There's a light sensor. And if you guys happen to have a phone that can do, let's see if we can try to interactively do this. My idea was that if you have a phone, there's a little sensor on there. If you have a phone, like my phone's got the little flashlight thing, just feel free to do that. It's not going to respond to you. It's just going to record the fact that, the light's brighter. And so the whole idea here is we're recording information, right? Where is this information going to go to? It's going to go to our data repository, which is SharePoint. So let's take a look at that. Let me flip over. So now, while you guys are passing that around, where'd my mouse go? Why does my desktop look different than what's on my screen? Okay. That's really weird. I don't know. My taskbar is on the right-hand side over here on what you guys see. On my screen, it's on the bottom. That's why I was a little confused, like, wait a minute. Okay, so let me drive this way. I'll just watch it over here. So for example, I'm just going to open up this Visual Studio project. I'm just going to quickly kind of go through this. Effectively, like I said, this is nothing more than .NET code leveraging the, man, this is really confusing. Sorry, guys. Where is my mouse? You know what? Yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. Thanks, Gary. There we go. Okay, so just real quick, just a standard Visual Studio. Okay, we were earlier right there. Yeah. Did I bump into something? Because when you were up here earlier, we had it at that setting, and then somewhere, that's really weird.
See, that works. So it's obviously connected fine.
Yep.
You could drag the bar to the bottom on the other screen.
Yeah. Okay, well, if you put it up there, I'll drive slowly off of that screen. Yeah, I don't know. It was fine just a few minutes ago. I bet the PowerPoint's screwing this up. Don't know. Okay. Okay, let's put it on extend. I'll drive off of that one, and then we'll just move on. I'm sorry about that, guys. I'm just gonna drive from a different screen. Okay, so let me just kind of go back to this. We have Visual Studio. Yeah, that'd probably be better. We have Visual Studio here. All I wanted to really quickly show is that this is fundamentally .NET code. It's a Visual Studio project. The nice thing is that, again, we're just looking at leveraging our existing skill set. What we have is a device, right? We've connected we've basically created a remote unit that is collecting information. And then the subsequent part is that information is coming to this little microcontroller, right? It's upside down, right? So it's recording information as wherever that remote unit is, right? So this microcontroller, the NetDuino, is in turn writing information back into SharePoint. Super easy, right? We know that our developers can write .NET code to get information in and out of SharePoint. So let's just take a quick look at my code base. My code base is pretty straightforward. what we'll see is effectively the only time I ever really truly mention SharePoint is in my namespace, and the rest of this is just information about making this device work. What information's coming in and where is it sending that information to. More importantly, what we see here is we have a web request. It generates a web request and then posts that information up to SharePoint. So let's go take a look at the SharePoint aspect of this. Man, mouse. Okay, so here we are at a SharePoint site. The whole idea, again, is we're trying to interact and leverage SharePoint for what it is in terms of a data repository, but we also know that it has an opportunity to provide us a UI, right? So if we go take a look at this, we have just a standard SharePoint site. It's got a couple of lists and a document library. And if we go take a look at this list called Light Measurements, okay, what we're going to see is that this list, and for some reason, 25 minutes, it's not recording right now. Cindy, can you toggle it on and off? Within 25 minutes, this should have said a few seconds ago, I'm not sure why it stopped working, but it has been recording all of this information, okay? Now you're going to look at this and go, well, is that really helpful? Well, the truth of the matter is it's like anything else that we're recording inside of SharePoint. We can obviously leverage all of the facilities of a list. We have all of the concepts of alerts, right? Because the data is coming into SharePoint, it's being added, and if we wanted to go and do something after the fact, we could go ahead and leverage things such as event handlers or even workflow to go and manipulate this data. So as we're taking a look at this, then we also kind of come back and go, well, what about the concept of really leveraging the Excel services? So for example, now that the data is inside of SharePoint, we can use something as simple as Excel services. And just to kind of look at this from a different angle, if we came back to Excel itself, my plan was to have all of the real data here from our demo, but obviously something's, whoops. Right. We can take a look at that. That's my chart that we were looking at there earlier. You know, again, data refresh, we have data refresh capabilities, and now let me just quickly authenticate. Oops, do that one more time. All right, did I mistype? I probably did. It's kind of hard to type with an angled keyboard. We can quickly see that my chart has obviously changed, and we can see some of the activity that has transpired in the last little bit. Let me just real quick see if this guy is going to change over. You can barely tell, but it is changing right now because it, whoops, cannot do that twice. Just take a look at the very tip here. You'll see this change in a second. But the point is that fundamentally we can clearly see that we're getting data into SharePoint. We now have the facility of our Excel services. And we've now satisfied the core criteria of we have a data repository, we have interaction, and in my very simplistic thing, we have a little bit of data analytics, right? So just really simple, straightforward stuff. Again, looking at how we can leverage SharePoint in working with this data. Now, if we go back to our slide deck here, right? Let's take a look at a second scenario. A second scenario that we'd want to look at is, okay, what about instead of recording information, we wanted to actually take action on something, right? It's one thing to, say that we have a device on our factory floor, or hundreds of devices on our factory floor that are recording this information. But what if we did the reverse? What if we said, okay, we want to leverage SharePoint to maintain some kind of data, and in turn have that data affect something physical, right? So let's take a look at that. So what we will see is we can come back here. I'm I'm going to go back into Visual Studio. And what I want to do is I'm going to go open up a second project. And the project that I'm going to open up, I've called Switchboard. And the whole idea here is we are going to, and I'm going to switch over to SharePoint too, because I've got to put a couple of different pieces together. What we can do is we can come back and say, okay, well, what about the process of let's just control a light, right? I don't know if you guys noticed, but there's a little green LED. Let's just pretend that this is the connection to a switch or a relay, all right? So I want to turn this thing on, but I want to let SharePoint be the master controller of the state of life, if you would. So what we did here was we simply said, okay, let's just use a standard SharePoint list. We even chose a task list because task list has some nice, simple UI that we can leverage. Okay, so I'm going to go back into Visual Studio, and what I will do is I have a different algorithm here. I'm just going to take this and I'm going to tell it, let's go ahead and deploy. So it's going to compile my code. All the code is doing is it's calling into SharePoint, looking at the value of that list item, and then taking an action on that. Pretty straightforward. So we can see here that it's building the assemblies and it's deployed it to the device. So what I'm going to do, let me do it this way. I'm going to redo that just so we can kind of let you see what it looks like. Again, just Visual Studio Project. Okay, so now you're going to see at the very bottom, it's calling the switchboard. It's calling SharePoint. And it's going to try and see what's the value of that list. And right now, the value in our list is that the conference room light, let me just kind of push this up so you guys can see the item. All right, just again, we're kind of, you'll see why I'm using a task list. This is just a standard list item. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this UI, and I'm just going to put a checkbox there. Then we're going to flip back to Visual Studio, and we're going to see in a second, well, within the minute, because I keep losing my mouse. Hold on, there it is. Yeah, I'm in a weird extend mode here. You can see it's calling the switchboard. It's going to say that it's updating the controller. And today's not my day for the device working. Let's try that one more time. I'm going to turn it off and turn it back on. And let me go back into SharePoint. I just want to toggle this. And so what we should see this again within the next minute. It's going to say updating controller. We'll just give it one shot here. If it goes false, it's going to turn my light off, but my light's already off, so I need to let it cycle one time, and then we'll see it come back on.
So you did this as a separate app, just monitoring SharePoint?
Yeah. Yeah. The thing that's monitoring SharePoint is my Arduino. Right? So it's calling into SharePoint. It's just doing a standard web call, and it's trying to figure out, it has its own logic to do whatever we've chosen to do. Whoops. Okay. So let me go back into SharePoint real quick. And this time, let's just wait within a minute. What we should see is this guy will pick up, call. It'll effectively send a signal from one base to the next base, and then the electronics, the design here is simply going to have us turn the LED on. So let's just wait to see how that works out. Now, putting a delay for a demo is a really dumb thing to do, but it's what we got to work with here. Dun, 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 dun. And we have a light. Okay? I don't know if you guys can see it, but I'm just going to pass that around if you guys just want to take a look at it. Again, this guy doesn't have any .NET framework. It's just the electronics of the radio. The real magic, again, is in this device and the combination of working with SharePoint. And so as I work with this, right, I can go back, and while you guys are passing that around, I can just turn that off. Again, this to me was really a neat little discovery that Cassandra made. It's like, well, let's just use a task list. It's very, very simple for us to kind of just easily see how that might be working. Now, as you guys are passing that around, the converse is, since we know it's SharePoint, since we know that we've got always a desire to work with our own custom UI, our custom branding, etc., there's nothing that stops you, as an example, from, and I lost my mouse again, for example, building your own UI, right? So in this does not look like a standard list item form, but again, we can leverage that. And then if we think about it, right, what we also have is an opportunity for us to work with a different form of custom UI. Right, we can take a look at all of the mobile opportunities, right? Standard, this is not hooked up, this is just a picture, but this would be your standard opportunity, right? You could go on your phone, my SharePoint list, it's holding my data, it says I want to turn it on, I want to turn it off, and effectively I have full control of whatever physical item that I wanted. Right? So again, a very neat experience. And then my custom UI, again, for the page that I just showed you earlier. As you continue to build your opportunity of interaction, right, we know that you can go and build your own Windows 8 phone UI application that you want to work with. All right, let me get back to my slide deck. Now, as we take a look at this, and I just have these slides because I wasn't sure how much connectivity we would or wouldn't have. Right, so just as a real quick summary, we know that we're utilizing SharePoint as a data repository. Right, we know that we have all of the facets of web parts, lists, etc. And as we think about this, right, this is just the jump between physical and digital. This really is a puzzle with many, many solutions. So as you guys are thinking about your platform, right, your platform SharePoint, I decided to take some physical data and push it into SharePoint. What are the other things that I can work with? We know that we can work with BCS, right? We have the business connectivity services, and that's completely designed for you to do what? Go get external data. So that, in many ways, says, well, maybe the data doesn't have to live inside of SharePoint. And very clearly, it doesn't have to, but we can work with BCS. Obviously, we have continued use of WCF's services that we can work with. We have the client-side object model. Once the information's there inside of SharePoint, we can do a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be just web pages. It could be something that is like a small desktop application. We have workflow. I mentioned event handlers earlier. With event handlers, you can do pre-processing, post-processing, right? What's good, what do you want to keep? As you go look at 2013, I think Spence has already had a session on it, but you also have this concept of request management. So you can imagine that scenario where you have a factory with hundreds, if not lots of data, right? Just think of hundreds of devices bringing in lots of data. You could utilize 2013's request management to basically say, you know what, we want to route all of the little devices that are sending data into SharePoint, we want to route them over to somebody else that has capability to not only deal with that data influx, but more importantly, kind of separate that from standard user behaviors and requests. We have an opportunity to work with remote event handlers. So remote event handlers would be the complement to our standard event handlers. So if you're utilizing BCS, you can in turn have that take action as well when data comes in. And then as we're looking at this, we can look at the concept of health score and throttling. So you can have your devices pull in this data, but then also have SharePoint say, hey, you know what, I'm a little too busy right now. please hold off. And so build the logic into your device, right? Build the logic into, for example, my little Netduino here. And we can say, you know what, keep pumping data into SharePoint until it tells me it's too busy. Then I need to wait. And then obviously I need to figure out how to, catch up. Now, as we're taking a look at this, right, we'll take a quick look at, are there alternate solutions, right? This is really an open-ended question. It is a puzzle with many, many solutions. SharePoint 2013 applications, I think, are a fantastic opportunity for the next evolution of what we saw here, right? Why? Because 2013 applications are all about getting out of SharePoint and interacting with SharePoint, though, right? So you can think about it in the process of, maybe I have my SQL table or my Azure table in my own separate application where I'm recording this information. I'm allowing users not only to interact with SharePoint, but perhaps they're coming in directly, or perhaps even routing that over to mobile devices. Very, very clearly, we have external data systems, right? We can leverage all of the custom data repositories that we typically work with. As you look at this too, I think one of the neat opportunities is the concept of a search-driven response. If you guys haven't looked at SharePoint 2013 search, you really should take a look at it, because now you have this opportunity of generating queries all through the URL. Now, if you think about it, that makes for a really interesting opportunity. What if I were a company that wanted to take action based upon information that's inside of my project sites? A lot of companies, for example, are building these automated processes where, for example, if I'm a construction company, I might create a project for each SharePoint site for each construction project, right? And they have a lot of meticulous information about, project start date, project requirements, and other facets of that project. Now, wouldn't it be really neat if, for example, you had a device that was hooked up, and I'm just making something up here. It was hooked up to your printer, and your site collection, your projects in your site collection, based upon a certain flag, you needed to print a document or print a book, a manual, right? So you can imagine the scenario where your device, and to even be more popular with modern trends, let's say it's a 3D printer, right? So you wanted to generate a little widget of some kind, plastic widget. You can imagine the scenario where your projects, your SharePoint users are doing what they do inside of their project sites, and they fill out a form. Your workflow says, okay, that thing is authorized to build. Well, with a search-driven response, your device doesn't really have to care about where the project lives. It just simply can generate a query and say, let me know if there are any projects that require my new widget. Search, boom, like that, picks it up, generates it, right? Right query will get you the data no matter where it lives. You could take that response, have it pipe through your device, and all of a sudden have it build that thing, right? As you start looking at big data, right, we also, kind of keep in mind that we have Power Pivot. Power Pivot is was introduced in 2010. Power Pivot's designed to look at millions and billions of rows of data. So think about that historical perspective that you can now take into something that can scale up very, very large and let you do all sorts of, data slicing with that data. So just as a closer, I just wanted to show you a real-world application that we're working on, and what we're doing is we're building a monitoring system for a boat, right? Again, leveraging the concepts that we see here, where we have remote devices that are recording information. The information is getting pumped into this little Netduino. I'm not really stepping outside of the bounds of my development experience. I'm still within my framework experience, and now we can have information that's populated up to a SharePoint site, potentially up to an Office 365 experience, phone experience, et cetera. And now we have a full opportunity to kind of see not only what is the current state, but also go back and look at the historical information that's within that. So And finally, you know, remote monitoring is going to make, if you think about it from a business perspective, remote monitoring, your Internet of Things is really your opportunity to collect data, work with it. You have a fantastic tool. There's new tools that are out there. You know, I'll go back to the Netduino. And that makes everyone so much happier, right? Because it's much easier to work with something when it's in there and it's in the right tool set for you to work with. I'm going to leave you a couple references here. I welcome you guys to come up and ask some questions. You're more welcome to come look at the little rig that I have up here. I've already passed around the remote unit. And if you have any questions, feel free. And that's it. I just wanted to kind of let you guys see a different world of how you can combine data.